Rome, 2025. The city, really the whole world, felt like he was holding its breath. Pope Francis had passed, and there was this genuine sense of vacancy, a real feeling that the chair Peter was empty.
It felt different this time, didn't it? And in that atmosphere, all eyes seemed to be focused on one man. The successor everyone expected.
Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle.
Exactly. The name had been circulating for years. The Asian Francis, people called him.
Right. Admired for that humility of the global outlook, a kind of deep pastoral sense that really resonated with people, reminded them of St. Francis.
And the material we're looking at, it paints this picture of just widespread expectation. I mean, journalists, bishops, other cardinals, his name was just everywhere, top of all the lists.
You can certainly see why. His role, prefect for the evangelization of peoples, that's a huge Vatican office dealing with missionary work.
Absolutely central.
It placed him right at the heart of that growing, vibrant, global South Church. He seemed, perfectly placed, didn't he? For where the Church's center of gravity seems to be shifting. The anticipation was palpable. You felt it among ordinary Catholics, certainly in the media coverage. Yep. A real sense of inevitability.
People were practically writing the headlines already. First Asian Pope. But then, inside the Sistine Chapel, something else was happening. Amidst all the prayer, the solemnity, human calculations started to give way.
As the ballots were actually being cast, a different name started quietly gaining support.
Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Prevost was, compared to Tagle, a much quieter figure, more contemplative.
An American, yes, but really formed by decades, literal decades, of missionary work in Peru. Among the poor.
Right, and you just didn't see his name on those media shortlists beforehand. He wasn't part of that constant speculation cycle.
So for the outside world, it felt like, wow, a total shock, a complete surprise. But the perspective we get from inside, from these accounts, it's different. For those who understand it as, the mysterious work of the Holy Spirit, it wasn't just a surprise. It was seen as a sacred movement.
The suggestion is that maybe, just maybe, the very lack of intense media focus on Prevost, maybe that allowed the spirit room to move more freely inside the chapel without the weight of the world's expectations,
And then the moment came. The smoke wasn't black. It was white. The votes reached the 2/3 needed. And the name announced wasn't Tagle.
Robert Francis Prevost, the missionary from Peru, chosen. Pope Leo XIV. He accepted with this visible humility, a trembling nod, apparently, eyes lowered. And the name choice itself, Leo XIV used, reviving a name unused for over 100 years. A name that carries weight, history, strength.
So the world reacts with this kind of media frenzy, right? Questions, searching for political deals, divisions.
The usual analysis.
But inside, and according to what we're seeing here, the feeling is that something much deeper was happening. Not politics, providence.
Which brings us right back to Cardinal Tagle, the man everyone thought would be Pope, standing right there. How did he react?
The descriptions are really powerful. It says he didn't flinch. No disappointment registered on his face. Those who were watching closely noted this profound sense of peace about him.
Yeah, the accounts suggest he sort of knew, deep down, even before the final tally, a kind of quiet confirmation that God's plan was unfolding differently than human logic expected.
He looked at Prevost, his friend, now chosen for this immense burden, and he smiled. Not a fake smile, but a genuine holy smile, the kind you see on someone who truly accepts God's will.
And that insight is striking. The idea that he hadn't lost anything because he wasn't actually seeking anything. Being Pope, for him, wasn't some prize to win.
Yeah.
It was a cross to embrace. And if God chose someone else to carry it, his job, as he saw it, was just to help lift it. Through prayer, through fraternity.
And his actions immediately showed that. He was one of the very first to embrace the newly elected Pope Leo. The sources describe this brief, incredibly moving moment. A look exchanged, a whispered blessing, maybe a hand over the heart. Just zero disappointment, only joy that the Spirit had moved.
Then, in the following days, Pope Leo XIV asked to see Tagle. Not for a formal meeting, with agendas and staff.
No, just quiet, personal.
Exactly, away from all the cameras. The two friends embraced. Apparently, not many words were needed at first. Their shared path had just taken this very unexpected turn.
They did talk, though, softly, slowly, remembering shared missions, late-night theological debates, those quiet moments working near each other in the Curia, the Vatican's administration.
And there was absolutely no trace of rivalry, no awkwardness, just this deep affection, this mutual understanding. It wasn't about competition at all. It was reverence. for each other, and for the path God had laid out.
Pope Leo apparently said, quite humbly, "The Lord has asked more of me than I thought he would."
And Tagle's response, so simple, so direct.
"Then let us walk it together."
And that's just crucial, isn't it? Pope Leo didn't just ask for Tagle's professional input, as head of a Vatican department. He specifically said, "I need your heart beside mine."
Wow. Yeah.
And Tagle's reply, "Then I will walk with you," it sealed that. It wasn't just agreement, it was acceptance of this role as a brother, a companion, right there beside the chosen one.
And you saw this visually, didn't you? At the installation mass. There was that incredibly symbolic moment when Tagle himself was the one chosen to place the fisherman's ring on Pope Leo's finger.
That ancient symbol of papal authority. The sources really emphasize this act, full of fidelity, humility, grace. It wasn't just going through the motions of ceremony.
No, it felt like more.
I felt like a sacred trust between these two friends, a kind of theological clarity, showing the continuation of a shared mission, not just passing on a title.
Tagle's own words afterwards are just, well, they're incredible. Someone asked how he felt, and he said, "I felt relief, I felt awe, and above all, I felt grateful that I didn't need to rise in order to serve."
Think about that. Relief, awe, gratitude for not being chosen for the top spot. He genuinely seems to live by that idea that the highest place in the church is the lowest rung on the ladder of love.
Meaning the place closest to Christ isn't about power, it's about service.
It's where you're chosen not to rise above, but to walk alongside. Not to rule, but to pray. Not necessarily to be followed, but to follow Christ together.
There's even this detail about a handwritten note. Pope Leo wrote to Tagle, "Thank you for helping me carry this cross even before I knew it would be mine. Your peace gave me courage. Your silence gave me strength." And signed it just Robert.
It completely reframes Tagle's position, doesn't it? He's not the disappointed runner-up. He's become this pillar of unity, of strength, a brother, a counselor, a key witness serving beside the Pope. The sources really suggest the Church didn't turn away from Tagle at all.
No.
If anything, he's now in an even more vital, if maybe less visible, role.
Okay, so let's shift focus to Pope Leo XIV himself. In these early days, based on what we're seeing, what defines his leadership? How's he actually, handling this immense new role?
What comes through really strongly is this distinctive approach. He's described as a shepherd who leads by listening.
By listening. That sounds different, especially in corridors of power.
It's presented as almost revolutionary. Yeah, anywhere, not just the Vatican.
So does that mean he didn't just sweep in with a 10-point plan and start changing everything on day one?
Exactly right. No rushing to speak, no instant reform mandates, no immediate big reshuffle of the Roman Curia of the Vatican's government, essentially.
Right.
Instead, the accounts say he spent those first days just walking the same hallways, moving gently through the offices, the chapels, spaces for counsel, prayer, and just listening.
Now, some might look at that and think, is that hesitation, indecisiveness, maybe?
That's the potential interpretation, sure. But those who know him, like Cardinal Tagle apparently, they see it very differently. They call it wisdom. They say he's leading like Christ did. Not shouting from rooftops, but walking beside the people. This deliberate pace isn't about being slow. It's described as attention, as discernment. As one quote puts it, he doesn't act until he knows it's not just him making the choice. He waits until it's God.
And that feels deeply connected to his background, doesn't it? Those decades in Peru.
Oh, absolutely. His ministry there was built on relationships, face-to-face, not just rules from afar. He really learned how to listen intently to the concerns maybe nobody else had time for. And the sources give these specific examples, like finding him sitting quietly in the garden reading the Gospels, or pausing important meetings just for prayer, asking questions, and crucially, listening longer when people disagreed.
Listening longer.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. He's described as speaking not from the top of the mountain, but from down in the valley, kneeling alone in the chapel, carrying the world's weight, visiting prisoners, but quietly, no cameras, crying with people who are wounded.
Some of those descriptions are really arresting. He's not slow, he's just deep.
Yes, that one stands out. And he's letting the Spirit move before he does. Another insight. He sees leadership not as direction, but as accompaniment.
Accompaniment.
And the silence he cultivates, it isn't seen as absence. It's understood as him making room for the Spirit, for the people, for the truth. And that phrase we often heard associated with Pope Francis is being applied to Leo, too. He doesn't preach from afar. He walks with the wounded. He smells like the sheep. He cries when they cry.
There's also that idea floating around that he's leading not so much with answers, but with questions.
Exactly, asking the deeper questions. And this quiet approach, it's apparently starting to shift the culture within the Vatican itself and then rippling outwards. Meetings beginning with longer silences for reflection, people learning to pause.
So the question becomes less, what will the press say? And more,
What is this spirit asking of us? It's being talked about as this restoration, a chance for people within the church structure and maybe beyond to feel seen, heard, loved again.
Now, building on that spiritual dimension, it feels significant that Pope Leo XIV, an Augustinian, follows Pope Francis, a Jesuit. Yeah. How do the sources handle that transition between these two major spiritual traditions?
They're very careful to frame it not as a break, not a rupture, but as a kind of sacred continuation.
Okay.
Like two powerful spiritual streams, both flowing from the same divine source, but each with its own unique charism, its own specific gift or character guiding the church now at the very top.
So can you unpack those charisms a bit as they're presented here? The Ignatian first, associated with Francis.
Sure. The Ignatian charism is described as involving sharp discernment, a real focus on global outreach, on reform, structured ways of examining one's conscience, always seeking the magis, that Latin word for the greater good for God, giving voice to those on the peripheries, and that strong call to simplicity and compassion.
Okay, and the Augustinian tradition.
Yeah.
The one that shaped Pope Leo.
That's characterized more by the restless heart, from Augustine's Confessions, that deep internal searching, an understanding that's often forged through wrestling with failure, leading to this profound surrender to grace, a listening heart, really attuned to suffering, empathy born from struggle, gentleness, that tendency to pause before speaking, and a real capacity to respond to wounds with deep empathy.
Cardinal Tagle apparently has a beautiful image for this.
Yes, he's quoted saying, "We are not watching a new melody replace the old. We are hearing two melodies played together. Francis and Leo. Ignatius and Augustine. Two voices, one harmony."
That's powerful. It suggests Leo isn't contradicting Francis's legacy at all.
No, he's carrying it forward, but through his own Augustinian lens. That tenderness for the poor, the suspicion of status and prestige, the emphasis on mercy, those core elements aren't lost. They're perhaps deepened, explored in a different key. It's described not as contradiction, but as a conversation between these rich traditions.
Tagle apparently even used this analogy directly with the new pope. Francis showed the church what it looks like to return to the Father. You're showing her what it looks like to live with him after we come home.
Wow, yeah. It really underscores that the continuity is in the spirit, the underlying spiritual journey, not just in policies or programs. The journey deepens. The sources urge us, really, not to get caught up comparing them as rivals or opponents.
Right, let both teach.
Let both traditions teach us. Francis showed us so much about walking humbly. Maybe Leo is showing us how to rest in God's love while we walk that humble path.
Another really fascinating angle is this description of Pope Leo XIV as a man of two worlds. What exactly do the sources mean by that?
It points to his formation, really. He was educated, grew up in the United States, which brings perhaps a certain pragmatism, discipline. But his soul, as they put it, was truly set on fire during his decades in Latin America, specifically Peru, among the poor. That's where he learned to love like Christ in Spanish in that context.
And this duality, this bridging of worlds, is seen as crucial for his papacy now.
Absolutely crucial. He sort of embodies a bridge for a church that is undeniably more multicultural, more multipolar than ever before. The center of gravity is shifted south and east, and he carries that universality within himself, in his own life story, his memories, his experiences. He understands firsthand those tensions between modernity and tradition, between wealth and poverty, north and south.
Which connects right back to his emphasis on presence and encounter.
Yes, exactly. He's the kind of person who instinctively breaks protocol to greet the kitchen staff or the gardeners, who walks barefoot in his private chapel, who seems more comfortable in dusty missionary shoes than polished papal ones. Cardinal Tagle shared this anecdote. In the Philippines, when people heard that Robert had become pope, they didn't say, "Oh, an American pope." They said, "That's the priest who listened to us. That's the missionary who stayed." His nearness, his actual presence, mattered more than his title or where he came from.
And this comes through vividly in the accounts of his wounded pilgrimage.
Right. These aren't the big, formal papal trips. These are quiet, often unpublicized journeys he made, even before becoming pope, and continues now, to refugee camps, parts of India, Brazil, Eastern Europe, places of deep suffering.
Not about ceremony, then?
Not at all. Just about being present, smelling like the sheep, as the saying goes, sitting with people, crying with them. The sources insist these encounters are a kind of healing that you just can't capture in official statements or policy papers.
And he's also launched some specific initiatives that reflect this global listening approach.
Yes, things like the Church of the Two Hemispheres, an effort to foster real exchange, cultural, liturgical, theological, between the global South and the West, and launching these listening assemblies in dioceses that have felt overlooked or marginalized.
And the reason behind it.
His stated reason is blunt. We cannot afford not to listen anymore. And he adds, the gospel was never meant to be a monologue. It is a symphony.
So his fundamental instinct seems to be about gathering people together, not separating them.
Precisely. Seeing differences not as problems to be managed, but as opportunities for deeper communion. Understanding the church as this incredibly rich tapestry, not some kind of uniform monochrome fabric. The sources really stress that he doesn't belong to any one region. He belongs to every nation because the church is ultimately just people who need to be loved. And Pope Leo connects with that. He comes across as a father, not some distant ruler, because he actually shared their poverty, walked their dusty roads. There's this powerful image used. A pope with calluses on his feet is a pope who knows how to carry the church.
So where do we see Pope Leo really articulating this vision most clearly? The sources highlight a key homily, perhaps at his installation. What were the main themes?
Yes, they point to a homily where he stood, apparently not with prepared notes, but holding that simple wooden crucifix he brought with him from Peru. He spoke about the church enduring through history, not because of its own strength, but because it's loved by God. He framed its trials and struggles not as divine punishment, but as purification.
And he didn't gloss over the difficulties, the pain points the church is facing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He specifically named the wounds. He talked about the church being tired, burdened by bureaucracy, sometimes paralyzed by fear, tempted by comfort, fearing the loss of its own influence more than the loss of souls. He was speaking more about rules than about Christ himself.
Difficult truths.
Very. And he directly addressed the abuse crisis, the divisions, the problem of clericalism, the abuse of power by clergy, and the painful reality of so many young people walking away.
But the overall message wasn't one of despair, was it?
Oh, far from it. He issued this powerful call for the church to become witnesses of resurrection, not just survivors clinging to history. He insisted the future lies with those who carry Christ in their hearts, not just on their ornate vestments or rings. He held up the cross as the church's only claim, the sign of a God who became small, suffered with us, and rose to offer boundless mercy to everyone.
He urged a rediscovery of joy, didn't he? Getting out of the sacristy, the church buildings, and onto the streets.
Exactly. To be unafraid of looking poor, vulnerable, like Christ himself. And he spoke directly to different groups within the church, affirming the youth, welcoming their searching questions, their fire, offering consolation to families in their daily struggles, expressing deep gratitude for monks, nuns, religious communities, speaking to priests as fathers who should feel the pain of their people, who should bleed when they bleed, and challenging bishops don't fear losing control, fear losing credibility.
He even seemed to reach out beyond the church walls.
Yes, acknowledging that sometimes the world's sharpest critiques come not from hate, but from this lingering hope that the church could actually be different, could live up to its calling. And his plea was just simple, direct, let us be different.
And the impact wasn't just the words, was it? There are actions, too.
Right after the homily, the sources describe him stepping down from the main altar, going into the congregation, and personally giving communion to a homeless man, a child with autism, and a group of migrant workers who were seated in the front rows.
Wow. That must have been incredibly powerful.
The accounts describe it as a real turning point. People called it a Francis moment. Some even whispered it felt like a second Pentecost. This sense of receiving a shepherd they hadn't expected, but perhaps the one God had prepared for this specific moment. And Cardinal Tagle, watching all this unfold, his feeling, apparently, was that every word resonated deeply. He saw it not just as a strategic plan or a program.
No, as prophecy.
As prophecy unfolding.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's quite a journey we've traced, from that intense, almost universal expectation focused on Cardinal Tagle, through the genuine surprise of Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost's election.
And uncovering this unexpected, truly profound bond of friendship and support between these two men.
Yeah, and then exploring the unique leadership style that's emerging from Pope Leo XIV, one deeply rooted in listening, in authentic presence, in walking alongside those who are wounded.
We've tried to look beyond just the media narrative, haven't we? to understand the spiritual discernment described in the sources, to see Cardinal Tagle's genuine peace in his supportive role, and Pope Leo's quiet authenticity, shaped by those long years of missionary life.
The insights really paint a picture of church leadership that's fundamentally about service, not climbing a ladder, about humility, discernment, not just ambition or politics.
And it highlights the richness possible when different spiritual traditions, like the Ignatian and Augustinian, complement each other. And that constant, urgent call to connect with a wounded world, not from a position of power, but from alongside.
Tagle's peace in not having to rise, and Pope Leo's commitment to leading by listening, it really offers a powerful counter-narrative, doesn't it? In a world so often obsessed with being the lowest, the one on top.
It's a different model entirely.
It really makes you pause and think. Consider how sometimes, maybe often, the most profound leadership, the most authentic holiness isn't found in the loudest voice or the most anticipated figure. Maybe it's in the quietest presence, the willingness to listen deeply, to walk alongside, to help carry the cross, whether it's yours or your friends. What does this whole unexpected story suggest to you about where we should really be looking for authenticity and hope in our world today?